Hello and welcome to CYC Youth Chat. I'm Mark, and today joining me on the panel we have Dave, Gabriella, Jenny and Dan. Today we'll be discussing how to deal with terror and fear, something that has become quite relevant in today's society once again. So just to kickstart things off, when discussing a topic like this, what is the first thing that comes to our minds? David?
I guess there's things like like the news, basically, like things in the news can scare us. So like I think everyone says like the main paranoia like around what people like are scared of in society is what comes off the news. So people say, oh, there was a car accident on the news, someone jumped out of a window on the news, someone was shot in Afghanistan here. So I think like everything just builds up and like, you end up being scared of everything.
And I think the devil really uses the media to like implement a lot of fear.
To instill a lot of fear, exactly, yeah. So how should we as Christians deal with this kind of stuff? Like, is it something that it's not obviously something that we shouldn't be afraid of, but you know, how do we deal with things like this?
I think in theory we can say I have no fear at all and I have Christ and I have this and that, but when it comes to reality, are we really like that? I know about myself, like a few weeks ago there was a threat of, you know, they were going to behead someone in the city or something, and I hadn't been in the city for a long time, and that day I needed to go and do something. So I was walking and I was wearing a nice big cross that I always wear, and I was scared. So I put the cross under my shirt and just tried to like get in the city, do what I want and leave. Usually I'd go and, you know, enjoy it and things. I was pretty scared, but I know that I would always say like, oh, you know, if someone was going to try and kill me, it's okay because I know I'm going to go to heaven and I have no fear. But in reality, it wasn't really like that. So it's something that I need to work on myself. But I think, yeah.
How do we go about like overcoming this fear? Dan, what do you reckon?
I think, you know, it needs the grace of God. So I mean, like it comes by prayer. You know, like you speak to God and you tell Him, look, I want to be courageous. I want to be proud of my Christianity, even when I'm facing persecution. But you know, I don't have the strength to do that. And then God will give us the grace to sort of be strong in our Christian beliefs, just like the martyrs were back in their time.
There's a psalm in by Asaph. Is that how you say his name? I'm not sure. Thank you. But like he's talking like in the psalm, like he was just so like he didn't understand like why there was so much like wicked in the world and evil, and he was like I know God is good, but like I just can't get my head around this. Like I can't understand. He says, but like towards the end of the psalm, and like this is one of my favorite passages in the Bible. It says, "And I sought to understand this. It was difficult in my sight until I came to God's holy place and understood their end. Surely," and then he goes and talks about how like God is his portion and God is all that he desires. So like when he drew near to God, like he was able to have that peace, like like amidst that evil. Like so, I think we need to draw near to God more than ever. And I think sometimes fear can be a good thing because it motivates like you to come closer to God. But when you're using fear as like fear of like your Christianity being like a target and things like that, but I think that's a bad sort of fear. But I think the good fear is like because it forces you to go close to Christ because you know that any day could be your last.
And I like how he mentions, you know, I'll come to God's holy place, like which is like a clear, you know, reflection on the church. You know, like we know that the church is our
vessel of salvation.
It's our haven, it's our refuge kind of thing. We go to the church in time of distress, in time of need, in time of trouble. You know, actually, it reminded me of. Like you said, when we're fearful and when we're scared of things, like we draw nearer to God. And it reminded me of a few years back, there were threats. I don't know if you guys remember, there were threats to our church. You know, people are going to attack our church on Christmas Eve and stuff. Everyone was scared. People thought like people wouldn't be coming to church. And I just remember that night being absolutely packed. Like everyone was there. And I was just wondering like this doesn't make sense. And I remember I spoke to a woman about it, and he was telling me a story about a lady who was once in church, and what had happened was like, the seat next to her was put in a weird way kind of thing. So she sat on the seat like next to that chair because the chair wasn't kind of straight. And then when the cops showed up and whatever, and they came to that chair and they saw like that there was they had like people had triggered a bomb underneath, so that whoever came to come and sit on that chair, they'd fix up the chair first and then sit down, and then it would trigger the bomb. And this lady started crying when she saw this. And she said, and they asked her, why are you crying? Like, you've just been saved. Like, you could have sat on this chair. And she said, in fact, I wanted to sit, like, I would have loved to sit on that chair. Like, and enter into heaven with Christ. Like, how can we get to that stage where it's just like, none of these scare tactics, you know, that the devil implements through the media and through, you know, messages and all that stuff. Like, how can we get to that stage where none of that, like, scares us at all?
I think, like, I don't know, I think that when you do come closer to Christ and you spend more time, like that just develops. Like the more you spend time with him, the more you love him, the more you know him. Then when the more you know him, the more you want to love him more, the more you want to spend time with him more. Like it's like a process. And like I think when you get to a stage where like you're so like infatuated by like God's love and mercies and joy that you just like you just want to go. Like you have had enough of this. Like you just want to be with God. And I think that like you can say like you can do all these things, but I think that the only thing that you can do is draw nearer to Christ. Like
David, you were telling me before about how some people, when they heard of all these threats, they started taking crosses down from their houses and crosses off their cars. And Jenny was saying she hid her cross. Isn't it interesting that like the thing that we find our hope and our peace and refuge in, we tuck that away in time of like a fear. Like what's the reason for that, and like what do you think of that?
I think like when like kindly minded, like if we're just thinking like from in an earthly sense, like the first thing we think of is like what's happening is like, okay, people might be targeting people with crosses, so how do I get rid of that fear? I take off my cross. So that's like kind of relying on yourself instead of relying on God. So like I think like if you think of everything as God looking after you, as like a father looks after his son, then like it's something you can think, all right, like God, like say for example, like my dad wouldn't give me like a faulty car like without brakes like to crash. Like God is not gonna like give you something, so like the cross, like which says that we're his son, he's not gonna give us something which like is gonna give us harm. So like although like we could die, we die for gain. Like we die like with Christ. Like it's martyrdom, it's a crown in heaven.
yeah, and like I was listening to a sermon actually, and a lot of people were like going up to Buna and being like, like what are we supposed to do in these times? Like, we escaped from Egypt so that we could live in peaceful countries, and like, what is this? And then he's like, are you stupid? Like, he's like, you were told, you've been warned so many times that you're going to be hated for Christ's sake, that you're going to be persecuted. He's like, why is this a shock to you? Why are you so angry with God? Like, this is like, we've been warned. Like, it shouldn't come as a surprise. Like, we shouldn't take it lightly, but it's like, we shouldn't be shocked by it. Like, we shouldn't,
Of course. And it's like, goes back to what David was saying, that, if like we're living for Christ, there's St. Paul says in Romans 14, I think it's verse 8, he says, therefore whether I live, he says, if I live for the Lord, and if I die for the Lord. Therefore whether I live or I die, I am the Lord's. So I think it goes, and what you were saying as well, Gabriel, like we're not here, we're called to accept Christ and not deny him. Even though it might at times be fearful and like, and very, something very difficult to do, like maybe it's hard, I'm walking through a crowd of people, like suspicious looking people, and I have my cross out, like that could be something very hard for me to do, but God sees that and he looks upon me favorably. So like, how would you go about encouraging people and giving people the courage to confront this terror and this fear? Yeah.
I think the first thing is just to have hope. Like a lot of people feel despair when they deny Christ. They feel that I'm not worthy of coming back to God because I denied him and I hid my cross. But then we look at like St. Peter, he denied Christ. And look, he ended up being the rock that Christ built his whole church upon. And so we need to have faith that Christ can do the same with us.
And we see that his not conversion, but kind of change in perspective revolved around the cross itself. The thing that we deny so on such a daily basis. Yeah,
like I think the first step is just having the desire to be full of courage and having the desire to not deny Christ again. And then after that, it's just through prayer and through the power of the Holy Spirit that we form courage in our minds and in our hearts to sort of be proud of our Christianity. I think speaking to some people, we're afraid that if we deny Christ, it's written, if you deny Christ, he'll deny you. Like if you say like, in the last day, he's going to say, you denied me, so I don't know you. But the other side of the picture is that Christ is just really, really merciful, and I think he knows our weakness, and he knows that sometimes we can't really live up to what he wants us to do. So as long as we come back to him and we just pray for courage and pray for faith, then.
And it's an extremely scary thing to even think about, like the fact that a God who is all-knowing, and he himself says, I know and I've counted every hair on your head, I know you inside out. Like, it's a scary idea to even think that at the end of time, he could come and say, I don't know you. Why? Because we simply didn't take the time to know him or admit to knowing him, like accepting him in our lives. So the fact that it's a reminder that each and every single day we shouldn't have fear regarding any of these things is, to me, it's basically a command from God that in times of trouble, in times of distress, in times of tribulation, in time of persecution, like, you know, we might be experiencing to a certain extent right now, you know, we shouldn't be fearful, and we should put all our hope in Him, like Dan was saying before. But I think we've covered a lot in this first half of today's episode, so please stick around and we'll cover the rest in the second half. Hello and welcome back to CYC Youth Chat, where we've been discussing terror and fear on today's panel and how to deal with it. We know that terror and fear is, you know, the early stages before persecution. You know, it comes the terror, and, you know, they're trying to instill the fear within you, and then the persecution comes. And we know that persecution in itself is a foundation of our church, because it existed in the early church with the disciples who were all 11 out of 12 of them were martyred, like they were persecuted for Christ's sake. How can we get to that level of spirituality where persecution becomes something of a joy, like something joyful instead of fear? Because, you know, like again, like we said, like terror and fear is the early stages to persecution. So it does exist in there. Like fear, like it's very common that, you know, when persecution arises, everyone is fearful. So how do we've discussed how to overcome that fear. Now, how do we discuss, like, how do we go about, you know, accepting persecution as like something that is precious in the sight of God?
Yeah, so some practical points. I think, as Dan said earlier, prayer is the most important thing that we can ever do. A lot of that. And also, like, I was thinking about people maybe in Egypt or in other Arab countries where persecution is really, really
prevalent.
Yeah, so over there. And like, people see it and live with it all the time, so they practice having no fear. They can do that, but we live in a beautiful country where, you know,
it's too comfortable. Like,
yeah, it's, you know, maybe it's a new thing for us.
Yeah,
so,
which is why that, like, it instills so much fear in people.
Yeah, so when something happens, we get scared really quickly. But when you're in Egypt or another country and it happens all the time, you kind of walk around fearless, you know, with a strong, you know. So I think practicing to be fearless of things that we're not supposed to be fearful about.
Very true. Dan?
Yeah, like I think going off that point, like, it's important that to understand it's a build-up. It's not just like you're not going to wake up one day and just feel like I'm ready to die for Christ, you know. It starts off with just being, firstly, not ashamed of being a Christian, you know, in your workplace or at uni or whatever. Everyone knows that you're a Christian. Then after that, learning that when anyone asks you about your Christianity or anyone mocks you about your Christianity, you're able to stand up for your faith. And then the next step after that is, you know, persecuting yourself in sort of like asceticism, you know, living an ascetic life. And then eventually your love for Christ will increase, and you know, your build up of all these things will increase to the stage where you're happy to lose everything for Him, you know.
I just want to stick to the idea of persecution for like a minute or so. Like, what categories does it fall under? You know, like we know the obvious. When we speak about persecution, we think of, you know, headings in the city, and, you know, the people that were persecuted in the early church and the era of Diocletian. But in the Western world, how are we persecuted? Like, in what ways are we being persecuted? David or Jenny had something to say.
Oh, it was just, you know, very simply, like, you can be persecuted in your workplace or at uni and university. Where if people ask you, you know, why are you fasting? What are you eating? Why aren't you eating? All the things that we do.
We're afraid to tell them why.
So if you're afraid to do it, then and then you tell them, and then what if something happens? What if they, you know, do persecute you and say, oh, look at her, she's not, you know, involving herself with us, or she's not eating, or she's not doing this or that.
And that's obviously the equivalent of, you know, like what we said earlier, like people hiding their crosses away, you know, not like wanting not to accept Christ.
I know actually an example. One of my close friends, she was invited to go out clubbing, for example, and she's like, look, no, like, I don't really feel comfortable with it. And the people that she was with, they stopped being friends with her. Like, they hated her for it. And she was like, I don't want to upset anyone, but like, I'm like, you know, like, you chose God, and that's like all you could have done. Like, this is an example of like your persecution. Like, the fact that they hate you, the fact that they don't want to be like have anything to do with you. Like, if it's something that simple, like, that's another example of like choosing God over like worldly kind of.
Of course.
Yeah.
David.
I think, like, in society, everyone, like, tries to be unique. Like, everyone tries to find something that, like, makes them different from the crowd. Like that's something that makes us different from the crowd. And, like, God calls us to be like
That's so true.
like we're the minority, like so, and people just get used to it. Like if you say no, I'm not doing that, and they just ask you every week, come do this. No, I'm not doing that. Come do this. Like they'll just get to a stage like you're a different guy. And like I was speaking to Abuna Mark, and he was telling me like, oh look, I was like, I didn't get how people can be like so stubborn, and he said like, look, seeds can be planted now, which can grow in 30, 40 years. Maybe someone can look back and be like, I can't believe that Mark was like that in his youth. And that's something I'm thinking of now. What was he doing back then that I should be doing now? So stuff like that. But like also in terms of persecution itself and like being able to survive persecution, like the fathers say that like you have to have a foundation of Christ. So like people who don't have a foundation of Christ come to like a persecution such as like cancer, and they'll be like, how has God forsaken me? God has left me. I have nothing now. This is all God's fault. Whereas like if like you're strong with Christ, when you come to a time of persecution, it's just something like another like speed bump in the road. Like it's just another thing you have to deal with.
And I remember Abuna Mark was actually speaking on that uniqueness, where he was saying, you know, like it's very prevalent with girls, you know, like when it comes to their weddings, girls are obsessed with having the most unique like wedding dress and standing out and you know, looking different to every other wedding dress, and they have to be the most beautiful bride, you know, and us as Christians, we've been given this like blessing in disguise that, you know, in everyday scenarios, we have the opportunity to be unique in front of like the crowds, whether it be at work, whether it be at uni, whether it be anywhere. We've been given the opportunity to be unique for the sake of Christ. And I like how you mentioned that Gabriella was saying that they will hate you. Like, how do you explain this to, like, because us as Christians, some people, like as Dan and Jenny were saying, it's this gradual process where, you know, through prayer, through fasting, through getting to know Christ more and more, we discover like that this is something I'm comfortable with, you know, being unique and being different and standing out and, you know, completely neglecting like my friends for the sake of Christ. But how do we explain that to people who want to be accepted? You know what I mean? Like people outside believers, you know, they have this obsession with being accepted, and persecution for them is to be neglected. So how do we explain that this is something that's, you know, precious in the sight of God?
I don't know. I think like going back to the basics, that like I still think this still gives me goosebumps. The fact that like God sees value in us and that God loves us so much, and like persecution, like in its essence, is being accepted like by Christ, like into His arms, and like going straight into that. Like I love that so much, and I think it's just like that's the foundation of all kind of like any motivation to like be persecuted is because Christ Himself, like He loves you so much, and that He sees value in us, even if we don't see value in ourselves, even if society don't see value in us. Christ does. Christ, like He created us, like, and I find that so like amazing that like our God does that for us, and like I think that's any motivation to be persecuted for His sake.
But how do we explain, you know, that?
Okay,
like it's beautiful what you said, and I'm inspired to be, you know, persecuted now. But for people that are outside the faith, like it's true. Like for us, this is something that, you know, we find joy in. No, honestly, I agree with absolutely everything. Just for the viewers at home, everything Gabriella said was on point. But for people that are outside the faith, how do we go about explaining to them that we experience this joy?
Yep. So leading by example in our everyday lives, and so I had this book that I brought with me because, you know, it was related to what we're talking about today. So Faithful Unto Death.
Same Mark's publication for the viewers out there.
So there was just a nice, really short story of this really fearless man. He was a non-Christian, and he was very well known in his like religion. So it's in Egypt. So he's a very well known person. He just converted to Christianity, and the priest, you know, baptized him and everything, and the guy was so happy. He just went out and started calling out, I'm a Christian. And then Abuna's like, you know, take it easy. You don't have to scream it out, because, you know, you'll be persecuted. And especially that he converted, so he'll be persecuted even more than, you know, a regular Christian that's always been a Christian. So he kept saying, no, if they, you know, cut me up into pieces, if they kill me, it doesn't matter. I'm living for Christ, and I'll die for Christ as well. And then yeah, so Abuna said to him, okay, then he jokingly said, all right, I'll see you in heaven then, because, you know, I don't think you're going to live very long. And then it was true that after 4 days, Abuna saw in the newspaper that he was killed in the middle of Tahrir Square in Cairo in broad daylight. So he must have been preaching out loud with no fear. And yeah, so I hope one day we can all build up to that. Yeah, build up to that, having no fear at all. I wonder if, you know, I myself would ever be able to be like that.
And I think it's a very gradual process, like Dan was saying earlier. You know, through prayer, we do grow closer to Christ, and we do want to just proclaim it on the rooftops and the hills. You know, that we are Christian, and it come, like you said, that's us being an example. And I think that is you know, the most practical way that we can inspire people to, you know, to be joyous in these times of fear. But I think with that beautiful story, we'll end it, and hopefully we've answered some of your questions on terror and fear, and hopefully, you know, God will be able to provide us all with peace and joy during times of persecution if they come about. So please join us next time on CYC Youth Chat, and thank you for joining us today.